So look, the Beach Brothers Show is a show where we deal with Virginia business and politics.
Well, I'm Conrad Chesviner. I'm a Hampton Roads political activist. Best ideas for community improvement happen to drive me.
I help folks that are approaching retirement and in their retirement years.
I have what I call the empowerment agenda. And that means that everything I do is focused on empowerment.
You want to give a salute to Tally and Twine. It's time for you to have a high quality watch made in Virginia, made in Portsmouth, Virginia, from Tally and Twine. We want to say thanks to Southern Volkswagen Greenbrier for their great level of sponsorship. If you need a new car, you don't need to go far. Southern Volkswagen Greenbrier. And ladies, if you want your brows to say, wow, check out IamLitaWee.com. Microblading by IamLitaWee.com. I'm Seiko Varner. I do credit fixes, tax resolutions. I lend private money to real estate investors, and we do debt consolidations. If you need any of these services, contact me as provided. And now it's time to get beachy on the Beach Brothers Show. All right, time to get beachy. It was a little rainy out these last few days in the beach. How are you doing, good beach brother? Yeah. So how's life, good beach brother?
Very, very well. It's chillying up, if you may have noticed the past day. It had been kind of warm, but now it feels like we're getting a little bit of the briskness back in.
I think we are. Okay, well, it's time for the podiums. Would you want to go first, or shall I proceed?
I'll go first, if you don't mind today.
Okay.
My podium tonight sort of orbits around an intersection of societal variables that Virginia Beach's shooting event from last Friday happened to run through. Councilman Guy Tower pointed out the prevalence of guns nationwide has made itself into a disease, a standing public health problem. The shootings in Virginia Beach join notable ones like in Boulder and Atlanta, even where those gun users purchased them a week before or even on the day of their shootings. In Virginia Beach, many individuals had weapons, many had guns and ran away. We also had a police officer shooting during the event. It took the life of a beach resident, himself with a weapon he allegedly owned outright. And there's no body cam footage of the event, and it is still being investigated. The aura of police reform comes in, and Virginia Beach City Council voted down creating a citizens review board not 3 weeks before this shooting. This is a city that in 2019 voted down an e-scooter expansion in the city because of public health concerns with their use, and in 2020 buddied up to the gun lobby by sanctioning a constitutional city status, affirming their belief in the Second Amendment, when their very own council member Sabrina Wooten tried to put forth an ordinance that banned guns in public buildings. These things just keep stacking upon themselves, and I'll point them out as many times as I can, making sure to get ourselves rid of gun violence and fully police reformed.
Good stuff. It looks like we're really kind of concerned about the very same thing. We're concerned about the very same thing, but I think I'm coming from a different perspective on it. So on my podium, I want to talk about that decision that the city council made. So I'm reminded of a quote by the, how can I put it? The urban poet laureate, KRS-One. In the 90s, he made a song. He put out a piece of art that stated, say the word overseer, for example, repeat it many times and say it like a sample. Overseer, 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 officer, 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 officer. Yes, officer from overseer. Want a little clarity? Check the similarity. I don't mind that we have overseers. I don't mind we have oversight. As a matter of fact, checks and balances is one of the things that makes our great country work. However, when I look at the situation that our city council just voted down a few weeks ago. It seems to me that Massa doesn't want oversight for Massa's overseers. So when a citizen messes up, they're locked up. But when an overseer messes up, they're PBA protected. Now, one of the things that's going to happen is you're going to hear the whole crazy stuff about we need to have better police, community relations. Boo. This is the situation. When Joe Citizen does wrong and is punished, that's acceptable. When Officer Friendly does wrong and is punished, that's acceptable. Both are acceptable. The reason that we've had so much unrest and distrust and disharmony is not because of community relations. It's not because they're not playing basketball with the youth. It's not because they're not passing out turkeys. It's because when they do wrong, the few times that they do wrong, they're protected. Massa doesn't want his overseers to be punished. Why? We can debate that. City Council failed us. Those 6 people who voted against us failed to do what the community has been asking for and has been working on for at least a year. But you know what? It's not over. It's not over. And if you're one of the concerned citizens that believes that everything could be scrutinized, everything should be looked at and make sure it's done with right and exactness, join me and the Hampton Roads Black Caucus and some of the other organizations that are working to make sure that the oversight is equal. I'm Seiko Varner. I'm Mr. Empowerment. So I want to say one love to my beloved country. Peace out to Brooklyn. 2 up and 2 down for VA. And OHIO to Ohio. We love you. All right, back to the show. Good brother. It's interesting. We were both on the same tip today.
We're like-minded more often than you would like to probably let on. And yeah, those are very powerful topics. Very powerful topics. I don't think I would have been able to quote KRS-One, but that's just me.
Intriguing. There are some times when we are definitely alike. So we're definitely brothers, but there are some times when we are like-minded as well. Okay, so tell us about our guest for today's show.
Well, our goal with the Beach Brothers Show is to provide great profiles in political movements and politicians within the state of Virginia, as well as highlight the coolest businesses. In 2021, the Old Dominion features delegate races and statewide races for Attorney General, Lieutenant Governor, and Governor, our legislature, and our 3 statewide offices, to my Democrat appreciation, are held by Democrats. Tonight's show is for my friends across the aisle, the Virginia Republicans, as we hear from our special guest about how Republicans might be able to succeed in 2021. Our guest is young and very conservative. She's the type of person you may easily see become a host of a cable political show one day, or even become a politician herself. She's from New York. She's a writer. She's a podcaster and a growing Republican force with a youth vision. She's Mahgdalen Rose. Mahgdalen, we at the Beach Brothers Show are greatly appreciative to have you on as a guest. So how are you doing tonight?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me on.
I'm very appreciated to have you on as well. And I want to touch immediately with your journey into politics. As we all know, everyone's journey is unique. We'd like to know about yours specifically. You're only 21, but you've done a lot in a short time. So sort of walk us through your beginning to your interest in politics. How do you get where you are today? And of course, don't forget us about your current channels and your works and your podcasts.
Sure. So I got into politics about 3 years ago. Yeah, about 3 years ago. And I got in after the Parkland shooting because I had just graduated high school and so many of my friends were still in high school. And they were really being treated horribly by the teachers. I went to a very liberal high school in a sort of liberal area, moderate area. They were being really treated horribly because they didn't want to participate in the gun walkouts. They were not fans of David Hogg. And even some independent kids who just weren't into politics were being told they didn't care about kids dying in schools. And that really, it upset me for a lot of reasons, but it mainly upset me in that area because my conservative leaders, young conservative leaders, didn't seem to really care. They seemed to really only be out there with man on the street videos, asking, what do you think about this? But there was no support network for young conservatives. There was no realizing that this was a real problem and that this wasn't something to just laugh about and get views for. And that offended me. And I kept reaching out to people saying, what are you going to do to fix this? And no one had a real answer for me. So I started posting videos from that and then talking with other young conservatives and helping where I could. And from that, I got my own show, which is Mahgdalen Rose Report on the McFiles Network. And I started to work with two young conservative organizations, Freedomists, where I'm the co-host of their Stop Yelling, Start Thinking podcast and a writing contributor for them. And then my new contributorship for Trinity International, which is an organization that helps more young Christians on campus and young independents. And I write for them as well. And what I really try to do is to give really practical advice in what's going on. One of my articles for Trinity recently was how to survive as the sole conservative in a classroom and how to deal with the debates that come from that. So that's mainly what I try to do. And I also try to add in things about education, foreign policy, to bring in real subjects into the young conservative world, because a lot of times it can just be like, when can I get on Fox and Friends, or what did Trump say that day? And that doesn't help us down the line.
Interesting. So how do you support your fellow conservatives when they're dealing with, one of the things you said I thought was kind of intriguing is you connected the conservative movement to, you didn't necessarily say evangelical Christian, but I do see a strong connection between my evangelical brothers and sisters and my conservative brothers and sisters. Why do you think there's such a connection with the evangelical movement with Christianity, with conservative politics?
Well, because it sort of feeds into it, and a lot of it comes from who are the people that enter into conservative politics and the youth wing. And a lot of them are young Christians or young religious people. The organization Trinity is a very Christian organization. And I think it comes from the fact now that young conservative people really are sort of operating in a different cultural world than a lot of young liberal people are. I'm from New York City. I was raised in liberal area. I went to high school. I'm actually born in Brooklyn. Like, I went to the whole thing. My parents are not from conservative areas. My mom is from New York. So my dad's an immigrant. So I'm not, like, I didn't grow up in that world, in that type of really conservative world. I just sort of grew up in a very common sense world. And also both my parents were older when they had me, and I'm an only child. So they had really lived and traveled and done things. So every topic was discussed with a level of real logic in it. But the Christian element of it is really because that's where a lot of the young people in internships, in people or speechwriters, people helping candidates, that's where they come from, because those are the values that they want to see reflected in their candidate, and then it sort of feeds into its own cycle in elections and in off years.
Interesting. Well, being conservative, independent, and, growing up in a Christian household, I've noticed that there seems to be a very different experience between some of the Christians and other Christians when it comes to conservative values. And I would say that some of the Christians that I grew up with would look at some of the Christians that you might be referring to and say, y'all are crazy. This does not line up. This is not. So why do you think there's such a divide? And you can even bring it down racial lines to some degree, that there seemed to be a very different experience with melanated Christians versus less melanated Christians.
Well, I'm Catholic, and everyone thinks Catholics are witches anyway. So, like, in the Christian world, so I'm always operating at kind of like a deficit there. But I think a lot of it comes down to who had the best organization in different Christian areas. If you look at, Catholic homeschooling groups and Catholic church groups, it's a vastly different culture than it is with evangelicals. So with Catholic groups, I've noticed you have a lot more focus on classical learning. The Supreme Court nominees, for instance, that the conservatives put up, they've always gone to Catholic school, or they went to a Catholic college, or they were altar boys, or, Amy Coney Barrett's a serious Catholic. There's this focus on classical learning. and I think a focus on self-discipline because it's in the doctrine in a different way than it is with, evangelicals or people who are non-denominational Christians. And that's really the breakdown of the conservative world. To be quite honest with you, I think conservative politics is a bit bigoted towards Catholics because I've seen that over and over again. There's this looking down on them until you need a judicial nominee. And that's like, can I get a Catholic in here? And that's something that people need to realize, that if you want the most educated people for when you want judgeships, maybe you should stop shutting them out of political strategy.
That's interesting. I grew up in Catholic schools, so I know exactly what you're speaking of. That's intriguing. Hadn't considered that. Thank you. Thank you. Okay.
Well, I traverse around a lot of things myself. Politically, I've been conservative, and then I sort of switched to libertarian, and now I'm over on the progressive wing. That's been my time span so far, though it's been about 15 or so years. Most of my family is of the conservative Republican type. Are you a bit on the outside when it comes to your circle of family and friends?
No, not really. My family is pretty much all conservative. I think with my friends, I've never been somebody who has like a million friends or like a girl squad or anything. So my friends they're all pretty much conservative. They're kind of what I call everyday conservatives. My best friend is not somebody who's going to be out there campaigning for people, but will go vote Republican. So I'm not really on the outs of it. I think if I was somebody who wanted like a really big friend group, that might be the case, because that was a little difficult in high school. But now I think as the older I get, the more I'm just like, look, if you're going to be a jerk to me, I'm not going to associate with you. And that's kind of where politics is headed now. We're kind of at that point, but I wouldn't say I'm on the outs. But I know a lot of young conservatives, especially young conservatives who became conservative in their like late teens, early 20s, they're on the outs, and it's very difficult. And I think it's one of the silent battles that's going on in America, the fact that people are actually divided within their families, and they're divided over real issues that I don't think people realize how severe they are to both sides.
Do you think by chance that this might be highlighted by social media? It just blows it up.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when I was in high school, before I started this kind of political stuff, before I was a public person like this, I had very nasty interactions on Facebook with people that I knew who were my own age, who were in high schools that I knew or my own high school. So social media definitely makes it nastier. And that's one of the reasons why I think so many young conservatives who are involved in politics at any level, they burn out so fast, because they're in it all the time. I haven't had my Twitter notifications on for like 2 years. I have times where I go look at the stuff, and I could have a video that has 70,000 views, and then I go check it later on, because if you watch it in live time, you're going to go crazy. And that's one of the things in the young conservative world. There's very little mentorship to teach that. So my mom and I taught each other that, but then I have to reteach myself that every time.
Okay.
Well, you could say that, I'll say at least, that being so young and conservative, daringly conservative, if you will, is very intriguing. It's probably why you're moving so hard to energize the youth around you to similar ideals. So if you could break down those ideals for us, and what, I guess, is your pitch to a young Republicans group?
Well, a young Republicans group is a bit difficult, because I've had many interactions with leaders of young Republicans groups, and specifically one, when I called out on Twitter, I asked the director of youth engagement for the RNC at the time, Mitch Freckleton, what he was doing to win the youth vote, and he blocked me on Twitter. So I've had these interactions with these young Republican groups. It sounds crazy, but it's the reality of it. So I've had these interactions.
Crazy. Yo, people are so punky sometimes. It's like, she said something I don't like, I gotta block her.
Yeah. I'm not the only one. He's blocked other young conservatives. And then he ran John James for Michigan's campaign. That's who they put in charge of that, Mitch Freckleton. So we wonder why that didn't go well. It's because of Mitch Freckleton.
Okay, so his first name was Mitch?
Yeah, Mitch Freckleton.
I'm not sure if you understand the colloquialism around the word Mitch.
I don't, but I'm sure I will later on.
Okay, a Mitch. A Mitch is a male B word.
It's been very rough with him.
Intriguing.
It's been very rough with him. So I would say for the young Republican clubs, if I was just talking with normal people, like normal young conservatives, I would say to them, you guys have to pick what you're going to talk about. You have to explain your positions. And you have to realize that the things that are going to make you trend on social media are not going to be the things that are going to flip people to your side, because conservative groups will really reward a young person, like in time and money and merchandise and invites and everything, if they say, oh, we can't cancel college debt, we can't do an audit of the college tuition system, we have to just pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. But in reality, that's not helping you win over any young people. So I would say, if you're going to go talk to young people, talk about the things that actually matter to them. So college debt, healthcare is a really big thing. People don't think healthcare matters to my generation, but it does, especially because some people are edging off their Obama plans where they have to leave because of the age restriction. So you have to talk about healthcare, and you have to talk about the fact that the U.S. is not competitive. People think that they know what it is to live in a crappy country, but that isn't the reality. They don't know what it is to live in a country that when you have, you know, a G7 summit or something like that, or Davos, that country, our country, everyone throws the doors open. People don't know what it is to live in a country where that's not the reality. Like, to live in Sweden, you don't get the same gold star or red carpet treatment as you do in America. So you have to explain to them what that difference is. And you got to say, we're falling in our rankings. If education isn't fixed, if the economy isn't fixed, we're not going to matter as much. And you have to explain what that reality is.
How hard of a process has that been? Do you just simply bring up the topics? You're like, you know what, here are my ideas about fixing that.
It's a nightmare. It's a nightmare process, because the young conservative world is filled with rotting, like, grifting nonsense. And if you're in the young conservative world, it seems really small, but it isn't. It's quite big. And we have these power players. It's kind of like the movie, like the Godfather movie. We've got these power players you have to go in and kiss the ring of to get anywhere. So if you upset Charlie Kirk, you're not going to be invited to be a political strategist. That's just the reality. If Ben Shapiro doesn't like you, you're not going to be at that level of YouTube commentary. That's just how it is. And I think this happened because a lot of people in 2015 and 2016 conflated who won that election. The people who won that election, a lot of them were European strategists. You had data analyzers. You had people who had worked for Bob Dole, people who had been out there for Pat Buchanan, who had coalesced together to create a populist, digestible, somewhat conservative message to get Trump elected. People now think that it was like the YouTube influencers in the youth wing. People now think it's the people who wear the MAGA, t-shirts and everything, and it's not. So it's very difficult to explain that because you're not allowed into the rooms to do it.
Interesting. Okay, speaking of MAGA, we just had an election, and do you believe the election was stolen?
No, I don't. I think that Democrats took big efforts to really ram through a lot of legal changes in the months before the election. That's just provable. You see all the court cases, you see all the filings that happened in the year before, even before COVID. And Democrats aren't really refuting that. They're like, no, we did do that. We didn't overhaul the election process on a lot of state levels. But I sit here and I have a really hard time saying the election was stolen or hearing that, because Trump ran a terrible campaign. It was a horrible campaign. It was about nothing. It was like a Seinfeld episode. We're all sitting around and we're like, oh yeah, this is great. But there's no actual content. Nothing's actually happening. And what was really startling for me was I went and I looked at the senior leadership of both campaigns after the fact. And on Biden's side, he's got like global marketers and branding people and people who've worked in successful congressional campaigns, the entire Clinton machine, the Obama machine, everything. James Carville comes out of retirement to help him out in the South. And on Trump's side, the only strategic person he has is Lara Trump, whose sole qualification is being Eric's wife. So I look at these two things and I don't understand how we have gotten to a place in the Republican Party where the number one issue, and I know this because this is what I'm talking to congressional candidates about right now, the number one issue is not immigration or healthcare or the economic issues we're having, but it's election integrity. And it's election integrity because the Trump campaign refuses to admit that they ran a terrible campaign. Brad Parscale was one of the worst political operatives in political history. I did a video about him. I really was very upset about it. He did this rally where he was duped by tweens on TikTok. And that should have been a major red flag for the Trump campaign, but it wasn't, because Trump not only hires bad people, but he does not understand that some strategists are not going to look the way you want, and they're not going to be as fuzzy and warm, and they're not going to tell you everything's fine. And that was a major Achilles heel for him and the RNC.
As someone who's looking to grow as much voters as you can, probably in the youth-wise going up, do you like this new election integrity thing where it's sort of holding back the laws they just expanded and now want to go the other way with voting access? Or
well, I think the legal challenges have to be worked out there. It's not something I'm paying a lot of attention to, aside from the fact that I know what's pushing people back and forth in the Republican base. I think in terms of growing youth, you have to look at the map and see where you're above water for Republicans. So I think it's Kentucky or Alabama, one of those two states, maybe both of them, were one of the few places where Republicans were not at a deficit with young voters. And I spoke to somebody, a young conservative, runs a young conservative organization in Texas, and I said, why is that happening? And he really pointed out the fact that in those areas where Republicans are still above water, where Democrats have not eclipsed them, or it's even, in those areas, they've been really hit by the opioid epidemic. And I actually went to high school in Massachusetts. I've seen the opioid epidemic. It's not something that's gone away, and it's really horrible. And in those areas, they see that joblessness leads to that, and there's a correlation there. So I would just say, go to the areas where you're already achieving something, where you already have something going on for the positive for youth engagement for young conservatives, and keep building it up there, and stop investing in like New Jersey. Because you know what? You can have an amazing group of people in New Jersey, and you might win legislature seats, but you're not going to win a Senate seat. So stop investing where you're not going to win.
Okay.
Well,
I got one.
Go ahead.
All right. So that's intriguing. What should the RNC's approach be for people like myself who are disenfranchised and disgruntled with both parties? You know, I looked at what Trump had to offer, and I was like, that's whack. I looked at what Biden had to offer, equally whack. So I didn't see anything on either side that intrigued me, and actually spoke to some of the things that I was concerned about and were part of my agenda. Is there anything that the RNC, because they lost me. I mean, there was a time when I was a Republican, short-lived. There was a time I was a Democrat, a little longer, but time's over with. Now, both of them are whack to me. So what could the RNC do to some, because there's a lot of us who are just totally disgusted both sides?
Well, I'm one of those people. I'm very disenfranchised now as well, because even if you have a great operation, if you're running on terrible messaging and you're not fulfilling any of your promises, you're not really, like people say, oh, rhinos. Everyone's a rhino in the RNC. If you're not fulfilling your promises, you're a Republican in name only. Like, it's, people have this divide. I would say that, first of all, you have to actually pick things people care about. So everyone cares on some level about whether or not we go to war with a certain country. That's an issue that everyone's like, I would rather go to war or not go to war. You have to pick issues that the majority of people care about, but that are not something that you're constantly throwing gasoline on. Conservatives are upset about this. Not everyone cares about tech censorship. This is not a major issue in the same way the economy is, in the same way that gas prices are. So gas prices, if the Republicans are running commercials right now about gas prices, we would be in a very good situation. But they're not. They're talking about being uncanceled and cancel culture and all of these things. Cancel culture is not going away. None of that's changing. Gas prices can be fixed. That's what they need to do. You need to bring a real level of practicalness here. You need to bring like a Newt Gingrich level of messaging, a Newt Gingrich level of writing out what's going to happen or what you want to happen. And then you have to actually go do some of it at a state level before Republican voters or disenfranchised voters will believe in you again.
I'm glad you brought up Newt, because I didn't previously think about him tonight until you just mentioned him now, and I remembered it back in '94 in the big wave, and they were really big in direct mailing at the time. What is like the 2021 version of that? Into what? Well, they were big in direct mailing, and that's what helped swung the
direct Republican. Yeah.
Is that just an archaic thing now? What's the next thing that could push Republicans towards success?
I think they have to stop investing in these grifting people. I think they truly need a better team of general surrogates, because the people that they've invested so much money in, when you look at who follows them, and people have these data breakdowns, when you look at who engages with them, it's all people who are already Republicans. So you need people who don't look like they're mini stockbrokers or like Fox News color block dress girls. You need people who actually look like everyday Americans. And that's something that even I've had to deal with. People would be angry about what I'm wearing right now. They'd be like, it's not professional enough, because I have to look like Kimberly Guilfoyle, who just did more harm to the Republican Party than like pretty much anybody at that convention. So you need to have people out there on local news, on radio. The Republican Party started turning its nose up at radio recently, and I don't understand why. Invest in local news, invest in radio, and invest in podcasts that have something to do with society, but not necessarily with politics. So maybe like a Mommy and Me podcast, or something about parenting, something about gardening, something that you're going to be surprised to have somebody from politics on, and that you'll have some time to digest what they're saying.
Well, how big is Trump going to be in that going forward?
Well, I mean, it depends on if he's going to run again. My problem with Trump, aside from some other things, is that if he's going to run again, and he's going to have the same team of people who don't know how to win elections, who have no idea what they're doing, it's not worth it. Because if you're standing there and you're saying like, oh, I want to be president again, but I'm looking at the same strategy team that lost it for you in 2020, it's just throwing away your vote. And then we're just putting the RNC and the Republican Party back further. We're going back further. Republican candidates, actually everyone who wins a presidency has a strategist. No matter what they say, they had a strategist. You know, Reagan had two, he had Rollins there. Obama had Axelrod, Bush had Rove. There's always somebody. Trump has an issue because he doesn't have that person. He does not have somebody who lives and breathes his campaign. You know, Clinton had Carvell. There has to be somebody that Trump can really use as his main strategist. And it has to all run through that one person. Until he has that person, I don't think he has a chance at winning anything national like that.
Okay. So you don't think he has a chance in doing a third party?
No, and he won't do a third party because
Party,
because he likes that the RNC is beholden to him. If the RNC is not beholden to him on some level, you know, what is he going to do? I always think whenever I hear Trump in the third party, like I think about people saying, well, what will the RNC be without him? What will Trump be without the RNC? Without constantly having that whole group of millions of voters to pool from, to be part of the primary process, he's never going to get out of that, because then he's not part of the daily life of Republicans, and Republicans might replace him. And whether you love him or hate him, he doesn't want that.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Yeah, quickly, because I know Conrad has a burning question. What were your thoughts on the Vanilla ISIS uprising?
I don't know what that is.
It's a plan was for January 6th.
Oh, well, I think January 6th was really the culmination of people being defrauded by the Republican Party. I watched those Georgia rallies. Do you remember before this happened, there were all these rallies with all those people to protect the vote? And I thought to myself, this is not going to end well, because people are being lied to and told that the country is being stolen. And this is not happening. Trump ran a terrible campaign. Democrats had some legal challenges that were like a little iffy, but this is what happened. So when you had retired generals on a stage, and you had people who Trump had given this political blessing to, saying you need to stand up and protect your country, I'm not surprised that people who think they were doing the right thing in their warped minds went and did what they did. It was completely avoidable. It's Trump's fault. And I don't think anyone in the RNC who's allowed to say it is being honest about how bad the ramifications were for it internationally, domestically, fundraising wise. It's been a disaster, and it was completely avoidable, and it shouldn't have happened.
Well, you and Seiko and myself have been the great fortune to be as a part of the Sharp Way, which is Larry Sharp's podcast, bringing his libertarian ideals to more of a wider audience, because he wants to be I want to speak to conservatives. I want to speak to progressives, independents. Seiko represented an independent empowerment, and I represented progressivism, you conservatism. In fact, it was your appearance to sort of make us seek you out due to how dynamic you are. And we sort of want you to address this dynamism and how you could analyze your stance on the successes and failures of progressivism on winning the youth vote, and how could conservatism seek out and match with empowerment of the individual to help win in the battlefield of ideas for this year and beyond.
Well, progressives have amazing strategists. They have a lot of money. They have a good infrastructure. They have a hive mind mentality that hurts them when it's not an election year, but helps them when it is. So they are really able to compartmentalize what they need to get done. I remember when Biden won the nomination, like a couple weeks after that, trying to figure out who had called the truce in progressivism, because we now know someone who called the truce because of that Time magazine article that came out. Someone called the truce and said, this is what we're going to do. This is how it's going to run. You're going to shut up and you're going to talk. And everybody laid it out, and we're going to pick Kamala Harris. And they ran it like a boardroom meeting. So progressives win over young people because they all get together and they decide what needs to be done. And they look at a map and they have a common goal of winning. Republicans do not have a common goal of winning. Some Republicans want to win, other Republicans are apathetic, and this other weird portion of Republicans, which is destroying the RNC, wants to be really, really famous. So they are the ones that have been tasked with winning young voters, but they're not trying to win young voters. They're trying to get more and more followers from older conservatives who like what they're saying. So on the flip side of that, you have that, and then you have all the money that's been poured into them, so you don't want to not have a cash out on that investment. Progressives don't have this issue. I watch the Young Turks. I've seen that. I think they're wrong on a lot of things, but they are very succinct in what they're saying. And it's the same messaging all the time. Republicans don't have continuity of messaging. And they're also very snobbish when it comes to young people. I get told all the time, like, oh, well, I'm not, I don't look the right part for this, and I didn't say this the right way, and how dare I post music by Taylor Swift on Instagram. Like, they're upset about things that make them look snobby, whereas liberals are like, whatever you want to do, just check that ballot for Democrats and tweet what we tell you, and you can have anything you want. And that's really the difference.
Well, now I guess more for the nitty gritty, considering that Seiko and I are over in Virginia, and we're 8.6 million strong here. But with a healthy, dense core of cities like the DC metro area and Richmond and here in Hampton Roads, there's a lot of suburbs as well, but we also have a farm history, so agriculture is strong. But the last time we had a Republican win a statewide race was Bob McDonnell for governor in 2009. And conservative Ken Cuccinelli lost in 2013. Establishment Ed Gillespie lost in 2017, and the state legislature turned blue in the past couple election cycles. So some Republicans might be defeatist, thinking that too much of the DC and urban influence is pushing into the state. But could a rebound happen in 2021 during our governor years?
It could, except Republicans don't care about Virginia anymore at the national level. And I covered this extensively when we lost the state house and everything. And what's so frustrating about Virginia legislatures is it's 18 to 21 in the state Senate. It's not like 70 to a million. Like, there's not this giant gap there. So it's completely closable. And we're not in a deep, deep blue area statewide. It's about 10 seats in the state house. And I think in the governor's race last time it was like 55 to 44 or something. So these are not huge margins. The problem you have is that Republicans on a national level don't think Virginia's worth it anymore. So you have to really rely on local organizing. And in terms of this governor's race, I've had a lot of people email me about the governor's race. I haven't really picked a candidate yet that I'm celebrating or pushing forward. But I will say, to have a candidate that has some sort of life experience other than politics may be really good. What's interesting to me is that on the Democrat side, all the Democrats running are all government people. They all come from the government. One of them, I think, was previously governor. So they're really going deep into politics, political people. Whereas on the Republican side, you have people from the Army, you have business owners, you have outsiders. So I would say coalesce around the compromise candidate for the Republican side, the person that's a little bit outsider but still digestible, and you might have a shot, especially because nobody likes Northam.
You're correct. No one really likes Northam, but there's also, from my progressive wing, sort of like a distaste of the guy who was governor before, Terry McAuliffe.
Yeah,
He
yeah.
seems is a very establishment, big money guy. So, and he comes in and he just pushes everyone out who they're government people as well. You got a lot of delegates who are running and state senators who are running in the Democrat side, but they were seen as the more progressive, also women, and then they're suddenly drowned out completely by Terry McAuliffe, who's been there before for the money. And then you have the Republican side, and again, you're hitting the right point about they seem like they want to run on the idea of being outside of government. So we're the business people. So because of that, that's why you should vote for us. And is that a message that's specifically designed to cater to people who want to only win Republicans, or just as many possible voters as possible?
Well, I think the problem they have is that they're using language that got Trump elected in 2016, but they don't understand the strategy behind it. So after Trump got elected, all those strategists who built this playbook that they're all using, they all disappeared. Some of them went on to speaking gigs, some were exiled, some sort of just floated away. So everyone is using this outsider language, but they're not articulating it in what being an outsider truly can have be offered to you. They're just saying, I'm not part of DC. Trump's being an outsider meant that he understood economics in a way that people who only had served in government didn't. So I think it's what they think works for winning general elections, but it isn't the reality anymore because they don't have the minds to carry it through. The Republican Party has always been the party that really had great strategy in it. Even if we didn't win, we still looked at why we lost. We still dove into it. That's not the reality anymore. So you have this stale language that everyone's just using over and over again.
Well, Ben, I think I got one right behind my computer here. I had a little literature from Glenn Youngkin. Business guy is like, hey, I used to be CEO. Here's my millions. I'm not like those dudes in Richmond, even though he wants to be a governor in Richmond. So that's what it seems like. And he doesn't seem to take a lot of policy positions either. I guess with that. And I guess if that's supposed to be the winning strategy for government, does it not seem like you care about government?
No, it's not.
Yeah, he's kind of interesting. I've been getting the Youngkin calls. You know, I'm on both the, I've ended up on both the Democratic and the Republican call list. So I get them all. And it's really kind of interesting.
Got it.
Yeah, I'm getting them all. One thing that's intriguing about you is that you don't just deal with the surface level politics. You deal with things like the national debt. So, so what do you think needs to happen so that America can get out of debt?
Well, I think we really have to do an audit of what we're spending nationwide. There's so much money going into projects that don't even exist anymore. I love every year when Rand Paul reads out the Festivus report where he's like, this is what we spent on like making sure that geckos have sunlight or whatever it is. And I love it because it shows the ridiculousness of it. So you need a full audit of everything. You might have to address the Social Security age issue. And that's something that Republicans, if they're so afraid to have it addressed, then just outsource it to the think tanks and come back with policy proposals and don't talk about it for an election cycle if you think it'll lose you everything. So you have to address that. You also have to really look at how much you're paying other countries for things. This is one of the things that I really liked about Trump was he would go in and he'd be like, hey, why are we paying for NATO? Hey, why isn't Angela Merkel taking care of this? And that was a very positive thing. So you have to look at defense spending for other countries and just see where you can scale down. You know, Biden trouts out these $1 trillion plans. And every time I see it, I think to myself, where is the money coming from? There has to be a moratorium on that. There cannot be $3 trillion for climate change stuff. Because even if all the money goes to a really great organization, that's still not enough money to make China stop doing pollution. It's still not addressing any of the international proponents of pollution and air quality changes. So you need to scale back these massive bills. And Congress has got to start actually participating in the executive order process, in holding the president accountable for just signing out huge amounts of money. Because until you do that, you're just going to keep spending over and over again. We cannot keep spending like this. And that's something Republicans are afraid to say right now.
And interesting. One last, just I guess a American political question.
Yeah.
We're in the midst of the I want to say it's a trial of the century, but it is a trial that a lot of us are kind of looking at. So I have a prediction, and I predict that based on America's history, Derek Chauvin's going to walk. American exceptionalism seems to protect everyone that they care for, except for those they don't care for. So, what are your thoughts on this Derek Chauvin trial, which is really a George Floyd trial when you kind of look at things, the way it's kind of falling in place?
Well, I haven't followed it at all, and it's one of those stories that I think really changed how people were even looking at policing as well, in the overuse of policing, because that's something I've heard from many young people on all sides of the aisle. I think with this trial, that if people continue to cover it in the way that they are, which I think has been somewhat honest with what's going on, it will allow for a lot of healing. And even with whatever the outcome of it is, you're going to have at least knowledge about what's going on. It's always good to have facts out there. I don't know which way it's going to go, but I do hope that even if it's the way some people want or some people don't want, that there's still peace within this country, because economics and in terms of how people are living their lives cannot take another level of violence from it. But I do think that the coverage of it has been more honest than we've seen going forward.
I'll follow up on that. Do you think that Republicans have just as much of a seat at the table addressing something like police reform and drug laws and all of that, or is that something that the messaging doesn't even seem like they're welcome?
Well, I don't know. I don't think that they do, but I also don't think they want one. If you really look at what they push forward, they don't really seem to care very much. I'm not somebody who supports legalization of marijuana everywhere. That's my position on that. But I see a lot of Republicans who might also have that position, who are sort of just backing down to the more libertarian wing of the Republican Party about it because it's not worth it to them. The only time I think you're going to see Republicans get really involved in drug discussions and prosecuting that is if parents start to care more about it. If you have a big backlash from parents against, drug culture and having a lot of laws that they feel are unfair to young people, until you have that, Republicans aren't going to care about it, because the linchpin of conservatism that some people don't get is everything is run by moms. Everything is run by the parents, and a lot of the parents in Christian households, that's where it comes from. So until they start listening to them, or until they start caring, they're not going to request a seat at the table.
Well, I sort of want to wrap up tonight, I guess, highlighting your strength in both messaging and trying to get as much people out here to be engaged in Republicanism as possible. And this is a big election year for the state. And a couple times in the past big election cycles after a presidential year, Virginia is seen as the state that might be a bellwether about future things in the next couple of years. Because remember, we elected McDonnell, and then all of a sudden the next year was the Tea Party wave. Is Virginia capable of doing something like that? And if so, how would you message the Republicans to be that successful?
I think it's capable data-wise. It's certainly not a lost cause, especially because the state Senate is only 18 to 21 and 45 to 55 in the state house. So it's definitely not a lost cause at all. I don't know if there's enough infrastructure here to have an upset. A lot of times candidates will put so much into the Iowa caucuses, for instance, and they'll say the Iowa caucuses are the deciding factor. No, they're not. Donald Trump lost the Iowa caucuses. I don't think John McCain won the Iowa caucuses either. So these states that I think previously, like Virginia, served as indicators are not indicators anymore. I'm more interested to see where states like Iowa are going, because Iowa is not really paid attention to, and not really Iowa caucuses, but the local politics there. I want to see where that's going to go. I think that the recall effort in California for Gavin Newsom is interesting, because if there's going to be a big swell of energy going forward, it might show itself in California in that recall effort because people hate him. So if you're looking for some sort of trajectory path, I would say it's more there. And then you got to look at what's happening in European politics, especially in the smaller countries, because they're always a good indicator for what's going to happen in terms of the big message. If you're going to have a right-wing sweep or a left-wing sweep, that's really more where you have to go to look.
All right. Well, the Beach Brothers Show has been greatly fortunate to have you on tonight. I hope you had fun. We had fun. Any last words to get the viewers to head on over to your sites and your books, if you got any, and podcasts and columns and anything you can, just to get people to watch?
Sure. So you can always follow me on Twitter at Magdalen Rose, Mahgdalen Rose. And that's where you'll find my show, The Magdalen Rose Report on the McFiles Network, which airs every Thursday at 5 p.m. You can also go to Freedomist, which is in my Twitter bio. There's a link to all of that, where you can see the Stop Yelling, Start Thinking podcast. And I'm a contributor for them, as well as my contributorship for Trincy. I have a mailing list as well. So if you want to email me at magdalenrose@gmail.com, you can do that. And that's where I send out weekly content of articles, videos, live streams, pretty much everything.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad to have you on. Hope you have a great evening tonight, and we'll catch you around. Beach Brothers Show audience, I'm glad you guys watched tonight. We're about to close out. I would like you guys to know that it might have some Bay Effect snow this upcoming night and into tomorrow, so drive safely. And when you're driving safe, remember you might want to head on over to Southern Volkswagen in Chesapeake, 1248 South Military Highway. Get yourself one of those good cars that you can drive around in great April Bay Effect snow. So stop on by, see Charlie Roy, get yourself a good car, and have yourself a great evening.
This show was brought to you by Positive Vibes Incorporated, our consulting services. We do credit fixes, we do tax resolution, we lend private money, and debt consolidation. So if you need some of these services, we're waiting here for you. Credit fixes, tax resolutions, private money, and debt consolidation. Make sure you call Positive Vibes Incorporated.